that I might speak to you this morning in the name of God, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Amen. Please be seated. So anyone who has been around children for any length of time can probably relate to what Jesus is saying in today's gospel reading. What parent doesn't dread coming across one of those god-awful gumball machines in the mall? Daddy, can I have a gumball? Daddy, can I have a gumball? Daddy, can I have a gumball? It just does, it's relentless. Same thing with those horse ride machines, or the ultimate is when you find yourself standing in line at the grocery store. That's a whirlwind. That's a lottery win for kids. Chocolate bars, candies. Can I have one? Can I have one? And God forbid, as a parent, if you ever say yes to that, even just once, that is an absolutely awful, awful situation to find yourself in. And you would think that when your kids start to get older, that it would go away. That's not the case. There is a particular video game that my son Ben wants right now, and every single day, he's a cunning little bugger. Every single day, he will come up with a new way to let me know that he wants this particular video game. It may not be that relentless, can I, but he's doing it every single day. And how can that not wear you down? So yes, if you've been around kids, you can totally relate to what Jesus is saying in today's gospel reading about that poor widow. That poor widow who keeps coming back again and again and again, pestering that unjust judge to grant her justice. And she wears him down to the point where he finally says, "All right, if it will shut you up, here is your justice." And what parent hasn't done that from time to time? Here's a lollipop. But just because we might be able to relate to that scenario doesn't mean that we get the point of the parable that Jesus is telling us. I mean, on the surface, it seems like a fairly straightforward kind of parable. Luke, he makes it pretty clear that Jesus tells this story in order to teach his disciples and to teach us about the importance of being persistent in prayer. Seems pretty straightforward. Be persistent in prayer. But is that really how it works? Is that really how we want to think about our prayer life with God? That if only we would ask, that if only we would beg God for a gumball enough times, that our God will get so irritated with us that the response will eventually be, "Fine, if it will shut you up, here's your gumball." Is that really how we want to look at our prayer life? I'm thinking that if we don't spend some time digging a little deeper into this parable, that sadly this might be the impression that we are left with. But if we dig into it a little bit, I think we might actually discover that what Jesus is trying to show us is that prayer is so much more than simply asking God for our own personal needs to be met. It's even bigger than, as good a thing as it is, it's even bigger than holding up those we love and asking God to meet their needs. And that's not the only thing that's challenging about this parable that we just heard this morning. In other parables that Jesus tells, like think of the parable of the prodigal son. In the parable of the prodigal son, we discover that God is like the Father in that parable. God is the one who freely forgives. God is the one who lovingly and with open arms welcomes back his lost son into the fold. Or think about the parable of the lost sheep. In that parable, we discover that God is like the shepherd in that parable, who leaves the 99 in order to go and search for the one that is lost. So does that then mean that in today's parable that Jesus is saying that our God is like an unjust judge? Even saying that out loud sounds wrong. Or at least I hope it does. Our God is nothing like an unjust judge. So what is Jesus getting at here? So let's get into it. So again, there's a poor widow who is seeking justice for a wrong of some kind. Some injustice has been done to her. We never get told what it is. We never get told what the particular injustice is, just that she has suffered in some way. But we can imagine the kinds of things that it might be, because we know that widows in Jesus' day, we know that they were easy targets to be taken advantage of by others. And so we know that this woman has been taken advantage of in some way. And the fact that she is a widow also tells us that she has absolutely no one to advocate on her behalf. And so she is left to do it on her own. And in that city we are told that there was a judge. There was a judge who neither feared God, and there was a judge who had no respect for anyone. And that's the person the widow had to go to in search of justice. So she kept going to him again and again and again, saying, "Give me justice. Grant me justice. Give me justice." And for a little while he refused. But finally, as we already know, he got fed up and he said to himself, he said, "You know what? Even though I have no fear of God, and even though I don't respect anyone, yet because this widow keeps bothering me, I will grant her justice so that she may not wear me out." And in response to this story that Jesus tells, Jesus says, listen to what the unjust judge says, and will God not grant justice to his chosen ones who cry to him day and night? I tell you, he will quickly grant justice. So, a little bit of context. When the unjust judge starts grumbling to himself, and when he says, "This woman, she keeps bothering me," that line in Scripture can actually be more literally translated as this: "This woman, she has blackened my eye." That is, by going to him again and again and again, trying to demand justice for herself, and by refusing to settle for anything less than an equitable resolution, this widow has shamed him in front of everyone. She has exposed and laid bare for everyone else to see this judge's complete and utter unwillingness to act justly in this world. And so, in a sense, she has given the judge a black eye. Or she has put a black mark by his name, so that everyone else can see the kind of person that he really is. Now remember, Luke made it clear that the reason Jesus has told this story, the reason Jesus tells this parable, is to teach his followers about the importance of being persistent in prayer. And so, could it be Could it be that what Jesus is trying to teach us in this tricky little story, could it be that Jesus is trying to teach us that prayer is so much bigger than us asking for things for ourselves? Could it be that Jesus is trying to teach us that prayer is even bigger than us holding up those that we love and asking for God to grant their needs? What if Jesus is also trying to teach us that prayer is about crying out for justice in this world? About crying out to those who are in authority until all are treated equitably? What if Jesus is saying, as we prepare for election day tomorrow, that casting your ballot, that having your say in the direction this country is going, what if Jesus is saying that voting in and of itself can be an act of prayer in which you are crying out to our government for justice, so that the poor are provided for, the hungry are fed, the sick are cared for, the strangers are welcomed? What if casting your ballot tomorrow becomes about voting for the country and praying for the government that is going to respect the dignity of every single human being? Pray always and do not lose heart. Strive for justice in all circumstances. And here's something else to think about. Usually when something gets repeated in a parable, that means that it's probably an important detail in the story, so we should pay attention to it. At the beginning of this parable, we are told that in a certain city there was a judge who neither feared God or had respect for anyone. And then later in this parable, that same line, it gets repeated. When the judge starts grumbling to himself, he says, even though I have no fear of God, even though I have no respect for anyone, I'll give her what she wants. 2 times we are told that this judge does not fear God and does not have respect for people. David Luce, in a commentary he wrote, he said, could it be that this is Jesus' definition? Could this be Jesus' definition of what it means for us to act justly in our lives? That acting justly, that the root of all justice is to show our love for God by respecting those around you. This obviously isn't new. Jesus was once asked what people had to do in order to inherit eternal life. And Jesus said, you should love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind, and with all your strength. And you should then love your neighbor as yourself. Justice is showing love to God precisely by showing love to your neighbor. It's that simple. And a big part of loving our neighbors is crying out for justice on their behalf. Pray always. Do not lose heart. Cry for justice. I find this simple definition of justice really quite helpful. Show love for God by respecting those around you. And the reason why I find it helpful is, have you ever noticed that we Anglicans have a really hard time agreeing on anything sometimes? We all have different ideas in our own minds of what constitutes just action in any given set of circumstances. For example, I'm sure we all agree that it is absolutely essential and important for us to be caring for the poor. We can all nod our heads and say, yes, we should be caring for the poor. But we also may all have different ideas on how to go about doing that. We may disagree as to the best way of doing that. We may all agree that something needs to be done to address climate change and care for the earth, but have very different ideas of what it would look like to strive to safeguard the integrity of creation. This simple definition of just behavior, it's helpful because there will always be more than one way to go about showing our love for God and caring for and loving our neighbors. So in tomorrow's election, as much as I would love to stand up here and tell you who to vote for, in tomorrow's election, each political party, they have a platform. We might not have heard very much about the platforms because they're all arguing with each other. But they have a platform. Each one of them has a vision on how they would govern this country if they were elected. Each political party has a different approach and a different vision. The question I would encourage you to pray on as you cast your ballot is which party is most committed to showing their love for God by seeking to treat all people of this country with love, with dignity, and with respect. Which party takes seriously the responsibility to show our love for God by caring for people who are suffering in other parts of the world because they are our neighbors too? Which party takes seriously our love for God by seeking to safeguard the integrity of creation? And guess what? We might all come to different conclusions as to which party that is. Which party it is that would do the best job at this. Because there is more than one way to act justly. But the important thing for us as Christians is that by asking yourself these kinds of questions, casting your ballot, it really does become an act of prayer. It becomes an act of prayer because you are focused on crying out for justice. And one final thing. It turns out that Jesus, in telling this story, Jesus is not comparing God to an unjust judge. What Jesus is saying is that if an unjust judge like that guy can be shamed into giving justice, then how much more will the God of love and the God of righteousness freely bring justice to all of God's children? Let us pray. Gracious God, help us to be a people who pray without ceasing, by always striving for justice and not losing heart. Encourage us to look out for the welfare of those around us, to work for equity, and to advocate those who are in power to seek justice. Lord, teach us to pray. In Jesus' name, amen.